Masechet Nazir Daf Lamed Chet. We're continuing our exploration of Mishrat, which we saw according to the Rabbanan from the soaking. Mishrat. We learned that tam ki ikar, right? Very important principle in all the laws of kashrut and pots and pans, that taste of a prohibition is itself also prohibited. Whereas Rabbi Akiva learned from that pasuk Mishrat that if you combine the combination principle leheter mistaref leisur, if you have some wine that's soaked in bread rather soaked in wine, and as half a kezayit of each, but there's a little bit more wine than bread, then we combine it to a kezayit for liability of lashes. Good. Now we have some clarifications. Amar le Rav Asher Rav Kahana, Ela hadetanya mikol asher ye'aseh migefen hayayin limed al isure nazir shehen mistarfin ze im ze. Le Rabbi Akiva hashta yesh lomar heter mistaref leisur leisur mi ba'aya. A question based on this Baraita that learned from the pasuk mikol asher yaseh, from anything that is made from the vines are all prohibited. What do we learn from this phrase? That the various prohibitions to a Nazir that regarding wine and grapes join together one to each other. In other words, if one has a half of a kezayit of grapes and half of a kezayit of raisins, they join together so to make one full kezayit. Now, according to Rabbi Akiva, if you already taught us from the word mishrat that permitted and prohibited join together to make a shiur, so that bread and wine, half a shiur of each, will join together, then all the more so something prohibited and prohibited will join together. So we don't need this mikol asher yaseh. So Rabbi Akiva, how can you explain this Baraita? I mean, Rabbi Akiva can argue on a Baraita, but he starts to explain that phrase in the pasuk. So Rabbi Akiva, why would you need that pasuk? Amar le heter leisur bebat achat isur leisur afilu beze achar zeh. This question was asked by Rav Asher to Rav Kahana, so Rav Kahana answers on behalf of Rabbi Akiva that no, they apply in different circumstances. When it's permitted and forbidden substances that join together, one is only liable if you eat them in one shot, like bread soaked with wine, and you eat the whole thing together. But if you had some bread and then stop, and then some wine and then stop, they're not going to join together in your stomach. Whereas isur leisur, I feel bezeh, if I have some half a shiur of grapes and I swallow them, and then I have half a shiur of raisins, as long as it's within the same sitting, they do join together to make a full shiur, even if it's one after the other. And that's why Rabbi Akiva needs this pasuk as well. Good. Now, for Rabbi Shimon delet le seruf mikol asher yaseh mai daresh be. There's another opinion of Rabbi Akiva of Rabbi Shimon who does not have the opinion of the combination rule. He in fact doesn't need the combination rule, because Rabbi Shimon thinks that one is liable for any amount of wine or grape derivatives. You only need a shiur, according to him, for prohibitions that would require a korban chatat. But in this case, there's no korban chatat anyway. It's just simply lashes if a nazir has wine. And so therefore, Rabbi Shimon says any amount, even one raisin, even a part of a raisin, a person would be liable. So you don't need the combination principle. So what are they going to do with this pasuk mikol asher yaseh that tells us that raisins and grapes or anything, grapes and wine combine with each other? Mai daresh be amar lach hahumi ba'eleh le'olam eno nazir ad sheyazir mikulan. He learned something else from that mikol asher, that if a person when they're becoming a Nazir and they take the vow, if they say something like, I'll be a Nazir, but only for wine, not for cutting hair, right? Or only for cutting hair. He only says only for one or two of the three prohibitions and not all of them. So what happens when he does that? Everyone agrees that you can't be a partial Nazir. You can't be a Nazir only for tumat met, but not for cutting hair. But the question is, if you say a statement like that, I'm going to be a Nazir for the prohibition of wine, but not the others. So what happens? According to Rabbanan, who's not cited here, we saw this earlier in the Masechet. According to Rabbanan, he is a full Nazir. Once you say that I'm a Nazir, even if you only specify one, you're a full Nazir and prohibited in all of them. Rabbi Shimon, however, said, no, you're not a Nazir at all. If you didn't take on all of them, then it's 0. And he learns that from this pasuk, Mikol asher yaseh, only if you take upon yourself all of the obligations, and you're a Nazir. If you say, I'll be a Nazir except for drinking wine, then you're not a Nazir at all. And so he has something very important to do with that pasuk, and that explains Rabbi Shimon. Incidentally, this opinion of Rabbi Shimon that there's no shiur is very interesting, because if we look in the Dead Sea Scroll halacha, sectarian halacha, they don't have shiurim. They don't have this whole concept of you have to have a minimum amount in order to be liable. According to them, right, the peshat of the Torah says don't eat nevela. It doesn't say how much you can't eat. Don't have wine. Don't have any wine. At all. And so, whereas according to rabbinic halacha, there's actually quite a leniency, because as long as you do keep it under that threshold, while still prohibited, one is not liable. And so that leaves a lot of room open for people who just make a little mistake, that they would not have to bring a korban or be liable for whatever the liability is. So interestingly here, Rabbi Shimon is a minority opinion, but it is a minority opinion that does reflect a similar halacha that we find in the Dead Sea documents. Okay, back to the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Abu, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Kol Rabbi Yot shebatorah en heter misref lisur, chutz me Rabbi Yit sheben Nazir. Sharei amra Torah mishrat. Okay, now we have an opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who says something similar to what Rabbi Yochanan said above. Rabbi Elazar says, anytime you have a shiur of Revi'it in the Torah, we're about to show all the places that have a law of Revi'it. So we'll get to know all of them. So anytime the Torah assumes a Revi'it, again, the Torah doesn't mention Revi'it, we're talking about the oral law. When the oral law teaches that a certain prohibition has a threshold of Revi'it, we do not say the combination rule, right? You have to have a revi'it of only that prohibited item. If someone eats a ham sandwich and there's less than a kezait of ham, you don't say you combine the ham with the bread to make a shiur. No, if there's less than a kezait just of ham, then there's no liability of punishment. Okay, so that's true regarding everything else except for Revi'it and the Nazir. It's Revi'it and only in the Revi'it that we say that we apply the combination principle, because after all, it says the word mishrat. Okay, remember earlier, that was also the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who learns from the word mishrat the combination principle regarding Nazir. So we ask, Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar. They seem to be saying the same thing. What's the difference between them? If they're the same, one could have quoted the other. Ika benaihu Rabbi Yochanan merabi מרבה אפילו אוכלין, ורבי אלעזר משכינין מידי אחרינה לה. There is a difference that Rabbi Yochanan will include even food items. For example, if someone has half a shiur of grapes, or I'll say 51% at least of grapes, and 49% of a kezait of bread, those combine. So you can use the combination principle for liquids and for solids. Whereas Rabbi Elazar would only apply the combinations rule for liquids, but not for solids, which has some logic, right? Liquids, you mix them together, they're all mixed up. Solids don't mix quite as well. You can't really mix up bread and grapes. And so that's why Rabbi Elazar says no, only liquids, and Rabbi Yochanan applies the combination principle also to solids. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Eser rebi'iyot hen, v'nakit Rav Kahana bide hamesh sumakta v'hamesh chivarta. So now that we mentioned revi'it, the law of revi'it in Nazir, compared it to all other prohibitions in the Torah, so Rabbi Elazar says there are 10 applications of a revi'it throughout halacha, right? There are 10 places that you'll see that revi'it is the amount that is required either for liability or required in order to fulfill a certain obligation. Now, if you want to remember them, we have a good mnemonic by Rav Kahana that there are 5 red ones and 5 white ones. 5 red ones, meaning red liquids, like blood and wine, and there are 5 white ones, which include oil and water, that are white liquids. Hamesh sumakta nazir ve'ose pesach shehoru b'mikdash umetu. Now, let's to memorize the 5 red ones. Just memorize this phrase: a nazir and someone making korban pesach who taught a law in the mikdash and died. Okay, that phrase doesn't have to make sense, but it's a good mnemonic because you can see a little picture. Right, kind of try to imagine a Nazir and someone making Korban Pesach, and they're teaching some halachot in the Bet HaMikdash, and suddenly they die. So it's an easy picture to memorize, and if you memorize that picture and this phrase, each word of this phrase refers to one of the 5. So this is really fascinating because we can see some of the mnemonic devices, the memorization tricks that the rabbis use to memorize Torah Sheba'al Peh. And they are very similar to memory strategies that ancient Greeks used and even modern professional memorizers use. Right, you picture a scene in a certain place, and that reminds you of all the details of a list or a speech or whatever you're trying to memorize. Okay, Nazir, Revi'it Yayin le Nazir. Nazir is one we just said, that the amount to be liable for a Nazir is Revi'it. Now, actually, we saw that this was the Mishnah Rishonah. The original law was Revi'it, and Rabbi Akiva is the one that taught that, no, it's not Revi'it, but rather it's a Kezayit. Okay, so this one actually is subject to machloket, but perhaps this is representing the Mishnah Rishonah. This is important to remember because we're going to say in a few minutes that this list are only unanimous items and is not listing things that are subject to machloket, even though this one actually is subject to machloket. So that's the question. You can look at Tosafot for an answer. All right, so that's number 1. Second, Oseh Pesach, Damar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel, Arba kosot halau tzarich sheyeh behen kedei revi'it. On Pesach, you have the 4 kosot. Each one of the kosot has to be big enough that it holds a revi'it. Good, halacha l'maaseh, we have to do that now. Shehoru shata revi'it yayin al yoreh. There's a law that someone who is drunk is not allowed to issue a halachic ruling. How drunk is drunk, right? Just like for driving, right? They show you all those that amount of how much wine and how much wine you can have, how much beer you can have, right? So a revi'it of wine, that's it. You're not fit to drink and posek halacha. B'mikdash atar revi'it yayin v'nichnas mikdash chayav mita. One is not allowed to enter the mikdash while drunk. We learn that from Nadav and Avihu. And someone who does is chayav mita. So how much is too much? If you have just a little bit, just a little sip of wine, which was kind of common to have wine with a meal, that's okay. But a revi'it or more, then and one enters Bet HaMikdash, one is liable. Okay. Umetu tetanya minan revi'it dam sheyos'a mishene metim shemetamme'a be'ohel shenemar v'al kol nafshot met lo yavo. Okay. Umetu is regarding tent impurity. If you have a corpse that's in under a roof or in a building, then tum'ah spreads throughout that building or everywhere under the roof. Now, not only if it's a full corpse, even if it's part. Well, how little? So a certain amount of bones. What about blood? Yes, even blood, but as long as it's a revi'it of blood, then that's mitameh be'ohel. Not only if it's from one a person, even if it's some blood from person A and some blood from another person who died, that causes tent impurity. How do we know this? We learn it actually from the law of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol cannot become tameh lamet for anyone, not even for a close relative, not even for a father or mother. And that pasuk says, "Al kol nafshot met." Nafshot is in plural. And so we learn from that plural that even nefesh refers to blood, the life force of a person. And so the plural here says that even if it's this blood comes from two people, then also lo yavo, the Kohen Gadol is referring to, would have to keep away from it. But doesn't only apply to Kohen Gadol. The derasha applies to tent impurity in general. Does apply to blood. And a revi'ita blood, even if it's from two sources. Okay, that's the 5 laws that from red liquids. Now, here's the 5 applications of a revi'it shi'ur in white liquids. V'chamesh chibarta, halat nazir musora shenifselu b'shabbat. Another fun mnemonic. You have the loaf of a nazir and a mesorah that became disqualified on Shabbat. Okay, good. So again, you could picture that scene. You could make a painting of it. And that way, you could remember the following 5 words. And each of the 5 words will tell you what it's referring to. So, halat, revi'it shemen lahala. This refers to a korban todah that comes with 40 loaves. 30 of them are matzah, 10 are chametz. Of the matzah, 10 of them are deep fried. The ones that are deep fried get a 1/4 log of oil. Also, the other 20 that are not deep fried and also not hametz, also together, those 20 get a revi'it. So that's the application of revi'it for the halot of a korban todah. Also, a nazir who brings his korbanot has to also bring some mincha offerings, and with them a revi'it of shemen. That's for a nazir. Mesorah has to bring a revi'it of water. The blood of one of the birds gets poured into this cup of water and is used to sprinkle. Shenifselu ditnan. Ushar kol hamashkin temein poslin et hageviya birvi'it. So there's a mishnah that if you have other liquids, they make something. They join together to make a person tameh if he drinks them regarding teruma. In other words, if you have some water and that's tameh, some oil that's tameh, whatever, any liquids, and they join together to make up a revi'it, and a kohen drinks it, that's a derabanan level of tumah and cannot eat the derabanan level of tumah that prevents him from eating teruma. Okay. There you go. And the last one, B'Shabbat itnan. Ushar kol hamashkin birvi'it, ushar kol hashofchin birvi'it. On Shabbat, there's a minimum amount for which one would be liable if he carries different items. So for every item, it's the minimum amount that's basically useful. So regarding liquids, the minimum amount is a revi'it, and that's true not only for regular liquids, but also for liquids that one throws away, like wastewater. Use it to wash the floor, and then you carry it. So the minimum amount is revi'it. So there you go. Now we have 10 items that all have these that all involve a revi'it. Okay. Now we ask about this list of 10. V'tuleka. That's it. But there are actually more. And now we're going to propose a few more laws that also require revi'it. Va'ika, mervi'it notlin leyadayim. Le'achad va'afilu lishnayim. A Mishnah in Masechet Yadayim teaches that if you have just a revi'it of water, you could use it for netilat yadayim, not just for one person, but even for 2 people. In other words, if you have someone's pouring from a vessel that has a revi'it, and then 2 people put their hands under the stream, right, one after the other, one revi'it can suffice for 2 people. So how come we don't include that? And the answer is b'plukta lakamayre. Not everybody agrees with that. There's a machloket in that halacha, and some say that no, you can only use a revi'it for one person's netilat yadayim. And so we're only listing items that are agreed to by everyone. Okay, next challenge. Va'ika haya mevi paile shel chedes v'noten letocha hasi log ma'im mina kiyor. V'Rabbi Yehuda omer revi'it. We're talking about a sotah that you have to bring water that you're going to use to mix in the ink, and that the sotah will drink. And the kohen would bring in a earthenware a platter, bowl, like something that looks like this, and put half a log of water in it from the kiyor in the Bet HaMikdash. That's half a log. But Rabbi Yehuda says a revi'it. So there you go. Here's another law that requires a revi'it according to Rabbi Yehuda. And again, the same answer. B'plukta lakamayre. We're not including in the list of 10 items anything that is controversial. These are all non-controversial. So that's why we didn't include that. Okay, vahika. Now you already know what the answer is going to be, right? But we're bringing it anyway. But I think this is the Talmud's way of listing, hey, what are other places that we can think of that have a revi'it? We already know why it's not going to be in the Baraita. Okay, in this case, kama mayim noten letocha kol shehu. Rabbi Zakai omer revi'it. So this is talking about if you have urine, you're not allowed to pray in front of urine. It's not respectful. So now, if you have to dilute the urine in order to make it okay to pray in front of it, how much water do you have to put? One opinion says any amount, even a little bit is fine. Whereas Rabbi Zakai says you have to put at least a revi'it of water to nullify the urine. So that's a revi'it. Why don't you put that one in? And the answer again is b'plukta lakamayre. We're not dealing. This is controversial. We're only listing unanimous things. And lastly, v'haika mikveh. Bar me'ahi debittelu harabanan. What about a mikveh? We know when we think of mikveh, we think 40 se'ah. But actually, according to one opinion, an older opinion, a mikveh, 40 se'ah, is only for a human being, because that's about the amount that a human being can fit into. But if it's a small item, then you don't need a 40 se'ah. And if you have a very small item, like a needle that you have became tameh, and you have to dip into the mikveh, you could use a revi'it of rainwater, right? Just go outside when it's raining. You can gather a revi'it and dip it in, or even just a little bit of snow would work for that, right? And so if you have a little bit, a revi'it is enough. So here's another law regarding revi'it. It says no, that one the rabbis nullified that law, right? That law is completely nullified. The halacha now is that you need a 40 se'ah of water, even if you want to, whether a big person is going to mikveh or a little needle or vessel is going to mikveh. 40 se'ah is the minimum amount for everything. All right, now. Okay, so that completes the discussion of revi'it, and now we're going to go back to analyze some of the phrases from the Mishnah. It says, "Ve'eno chayav ela ad sheyochal min ha'anavim kezayit." We saw that there was a machloket. Rabbi Akiva said the minimum amount for a Nazir to be liable is to have wine or grapes kezayit, whereas the Mishnah Rishonah said it was a revi'it. That's how we got into this whole thing in the first place. Okay, Tanakama la medame lehon lechol isure nazir lishtiya. Rabbi Akiva kevan dichtiv anavim lachim v'beshim lo yochel ma'achila kezayit af kol isurin kezayit. Oh, so now we're getting some clarification. That Mishnah Rishonah that said a revi'it, that was for liquids. But they do not say that all isurim are the same as liquids. In fact, if it was solid, grapes or raisins that are solids, then the shiur is kezayit. That's the general rule. Most prohibitions that are liquid, revi'it. Most prohibitions that are solid, kezayit. And so that's the same thing here also. When that Mishnah Rishonah said revi'it, they were talking about liquids only. Whereas Rabbi Akiva, this is his chidush, since it says va'anavim lachim v'beshim lo yochal. It says a vav, and it lists all the things, right, regarding wine and old wine and new wine and vinegar, and then it says and everything, and then it says and also grapes. So by putting the grapes in the list together with everything else, we learned that it's the same shiur for all of them, and just like for eating is a kezayit, so to the liquids also is a kezait, even though kezait is usually a dry measure. When it comes to Nazir, the Akiva applies it also to liquids. Good. Now, Mishnah teaches also, V'chayav alayan b'fnei atzmo, one is liable for each type of grain product by itself. You don't have to have all of them. And this Baraita now is going to teach that one can be liable multiple times by eating or drinking each type of prohibited grape product. תנו רבנן, וענבים לאחיו יבשים לא יאכל, לחייב על זה בפני עצמו ועל זה בפני עצמו. So when it says anavim and lachim and fresh grapes and raisins you cannot eat, why does it have to list each item? To teach you that you'd be liable to lashes if you had grapes, a kezait of grapes, and then you have a kezait of raisins, you get 2 sets of lashes. מכאן אתה דן לכל איסורים שבתורה, מה כאן שהוא מין אחד והן שני שמות, חייב על זה בפני עצמו ועל זה בפני עצמו, אף כל שהוא מין אחד והן שני שמות, חייב על זה בפני עצמו ועל זה בפני עצמו. And this is going to be a prototype for other prohibitions in the Torah, just as here, since they're one type, one source, raisins and grapes are the same thing, but they have 2 different names. Because they have 2 different names, so one is liable for the raisins by themselves and for the grapes, another set of lashes. So too, other prohibitions that are one type, they're one source, but they're called different names, one would also be liable for this and that. Okay, what would be an application of this rule? Well, Nazir itself, לתויה חמרה חדתה ועין בה, to include both new wine, we call that grape juice, and grapes. And so, even though they both come from the same place, nevertheless, if one has grape juice and enough of a shiur, and grapes, enough of a shiur, then one would be liable separately for each of them. Okay, further discussion on how many liabilities can one Nazir have by having all different just grape products. So we're going to see it's quite a lot. אמר אביי, אכל חרסן לוקה שתיים, אכל זג לוקה שתיים, אכל חרסן וזג לוקה שלוש. Abaye has a chidush now, that if someone has harsan, okay, we're going to follow the bioseh for good reason, as we're going to see at the end of the stuff, that this is the seeds. If someone has seeds, they get 2 lashes just for seeds. And if someone has the grape skin, also 2 sets of lashes, just for that one. And if he has charsan and zag, gets 3 sets of lashes. So where's he getting the extra one? It comes from the kelal. If you remember in the pasuk, it says, Kol asher ya'aseh migefen hayayin. So he's counting that as a separate liability. So if you have skin and seeds, then you're liable to 3. Kol asher ya'aseh migefen hayayin, that's 1. Harsanim, another set of lashes. Zag, another set of lashes. Okay, that is the chidush of Abaye. However, Rava disagrees. Rava amar eno loke ela achat, sheno loke alav shebichlaalot. Says no. If you have seeds, then you don't violate also kol asher mikol asher yaaseh. That's a kilal. That's just a generality. That's the general prohibition. It's giving you examples. If you have that, you violate the basic law. If you eat that particular item, you also violate the general law. And so you don't get individual lashes for various items included in the general prohibition, right? And so the general prohibition is counted as the same as the detail. All right, Mativ Rav Papa. Rav Papa is going to challenge Abaye. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Nazir shaya shoteh yain kol hayom eno chayav ela achat. Rabbi Eliezer says that if a Nazir is drinking wine all day long, he's continuously drinking in one long drinking session, so that's considered 1 set of lashes. However, Amru lo al tishtevu shoteh chayav al kol achat ve'achat. If there are people there saying, no, don't drink, they're giving him a warning, don't drink, right, don't drink, and each time he drinks anyway, so because each warning separates the act from the next, and then he's going to be liable to every act of drinking that comes between each of those warnings. Now, achal navim lachim v'beshim achal sanim v'zagim v'sachat eshkol shel navim v'shata lokeh hamesh. Let's say someone eats fresh grapes and raisins and seeds and skin, and he also squeezes a cluster of grapes and has some grape juice and drinks it, he gets 5 sets of lashes. Okay, all this is a Baraita that Rav Papa quoted. Now, what do you see from the end of it? According to you, Abaye, because you count the generality as yet another liability. So, since he violated these 5 different items, okay, got it, right? And the Baraita goes out of its way to count them. They are 5. And so it doesn't just say that he gets lashes over each and every one. If it just said that, then you could have said, yeah, each and every one, and plus the general. But no, it says 5, and there are 5 different items that he ate. So according to your Abaye, should have said he gets 6 sets of lashes. So you see, this is a problem for you, Abaye. Abaye says, I have an answer. Tena v'shiyer. The Baraita is not a comprehensive list. It's like, etc., right? You're liable to these 5, and plus you'd be liable actually to more. Now we have a general rule. If you're going to say that a list is incomplete, that it's giving you, A, B, C, D, E, etc., well, you only write etc. if there are at least 2 more items that it could have brought, and now it wants to be abbreviate. But you wouldn't use etc. when you have only 1 more item, right? Instead of writing etc., just write the 1 more item. And so we have to ask, my shi'er the high shi'er. Well, Abaye, if you want to say that it's not a full list, complete list, what else besides the mikol asher yaseh is left out? And the answer is shi'er lo yachel devaro. This is the general prohibition that anytime someone makes a vow, he cannot profane his word. He has to make sure to fulfill the vow. And then this person, by eating all these things, not only is he profaning the particular Nazir law, but also it's a type of vow that he is violating. But we reject this. Imishum hay lav shiurahu ki katane mide de la ite beduchta achariti lo yachel devaro ite bendarim. Says no. If it's for that, that's not called something that is left out, because we're only listing things that are not in another context. But lo yachel devaro, that's in nedarim. That's a separate law altogether, right? What if it's Yom Kippur and he also violates Yom Kippur? No, we're talking about things that are not mentioned elsewhere, but rather prohibitions that are particular to Nazir, right? And how many of those he would be liable to lashes for. So that doesn't count as something extra. We need something else to be extra if you want to say it's not comprehensive. So Amar le Ravina mi par zakia le Rav Asher veha shier de ben habenayim. Oh, there is something else. There's another prohibition of the parts that are in between. When the pasuk says from pits to grapeskins, there's a derasha that includes also that part that's in between. This might refer to the pulp that's in the middle, or maybe some small grapes that are between other grapes. Okay, whatever that means. So it will be also that's also another item that could have been added to the list and is not here, since it doesn't have that one, and it also doesn't have mikol asher yaseh. So Abaye says, I'm good. I can reconcile my opinion with this Baraita. So now, Abaye answered Rav Papa's challenge. So now we go back to Rav Papa. Rav Papa, didn't you know that it's missing 2 items here? Why did you ask in the first place? Ela, Rav Papa, la tanya mideh hamesh. Rav Papa says, actually, the original Baraita does not say the number 5. Rav Papa added that in himself. The Baraita gave examples, right? If he eats these 5 things, he would be liable to all of them, right? For each and every one. But it doesn't say 5, and so really the Baraita itself is much easier to explain according to Abaye. And the Papa, in fact, added the count of 5. Maybe he did so kind of not knowingly, just like make it easier to, that's 5 items, right? Not 6. But really the essence of his question was from the fact that it says 5 and doesn't say 6. So we ask about Rav Papa. Wait, how could you do that? Veha otveh hamesh. U'machar de la tanya hamesh, my ta'ama otveh. Rav Papa raised the objection based on the fact that the Baraita says 5, right? And And now, if it didn't say 5 in the original text of the Baraita, why did Rav Papa ask the question to begin with, right? What is Rav Papa doing? He took a Baraita that actually there's no question from this Baraita. He added the count of 5 and then asked a challenge from it. So this is very strange that Rav Papa would do this. So Amar Rav Papa, Ana savre lav gemara hi bide v'adarbe v'la yadana digmara hi bide v'la hadarbe. So Rav Papa explains, I thought Rav Papa was actually testing out Abaye. So Rav Papa says, I thought that this was not a tradition that Abaye had. And since I thought that Abaye was created this, made up this law. I mean, he can, it's based on Sevara, right? He says it makes sense to me that this should be the law. So because Rav Papa thought that Abaye had created this law based on Sevara and not based on tradition, I thought that if I challenge him with a tradition, then he'll back off and change his mind. But I didn't realize that Abaye actually has a tradition, that this should be the law, that you violate one extra set for the klal, and that's why Abaye did not change his mind. Okay, this is absolutely fascinating, right? Methodology to see how the Amoraim worked and how they challenged each other. We learned a lot of things from this. One thing we learn is that Abaye and other Amoraim also, sometimes when they say a halacha, sometimes it's based on the tradition, even if we don't have that Baraita ourselves, don't have the language of it, but it's based on a tradition that they are teaching. Sometimes they are used sevara, and they say, by applying the way I understand the principles, this is what the halacha should be. Okay, that's important by itself. Now, secondly, that Rav Papa would make an artificial baraita. I mean, it's based on an actual baraita, but he added a word, added a count there. I mean, it's not such a substantive difference by itself, but then he makes a diuk from that. So the fact that Rav Papa would do that knowingly as a challenge. So apparently Rav Papa did not agree with Abaye's law and his logic. And if it was just logic, then Rav Papa is saying that doesn't make sense. And so Rav Papa, well, one thing you could do is you can ask him, did you create that out of Sevara, or is that based on the tradition, right? And other times in the Talmud, someone will ask someone else, right, is that Sevara? If it's a Sevara, then I disagree. If you have a tradition, right, then okay, then what can I do? I'll have to agree with it. So sometimes it's asked explicitly. Rav Papa was not asking explicitly. He was asking in a roundabout way. Maybe you can get to the truth better if you ask in a roundabout way. So how is he asking in a roundabout way? By modifying the Baraita and presenting it to Abaye. So if Abaye was only based on logic and he was confronted with this Baraita, then he would have backed off, because the Baraita seems to say, that's it, only 5. And you say, oh, I didn't know that Baraita. Thank you for telling me. I take it back. But instead, Abaye interprets the Baraita and uses the Tana v'Shi'er. Now, Tana v'Shi'er is a difficult way of explaining a Baraita. It's not really the Peshat, right? You can squeeze it in to say, oh, he was leaving out 2 things. But if it was really said 5, it sounds like that would be 5 and not 6. And he's saying 5 and leaving out 1. So Abaye would only have the audacity to explain a Baraita in a difficult way if he himself had a tradition. And so when the Papa saw that he's pushing back, and that he's willing to give a difficult explanation for this Baraita, it must be that Abaye himself does have a tradition behind him. And so this is the way that Papa was actually a next generation, is challenging and asking a question to his teacher. I'm guessing, that either way that Papa would have told him after, oh, by the way, that 5, I added that word in because I was just testing you out to see, right, how you would react. Okay, but this is absolutely fascinating. I don't know how often the rabbis did this to each other, but at least in this case, he's using a modified Baraita to see if there were a Baraita about this, how would you respond? And he can tell a lot about Abaye's opinion. All right, we got to remember the source and for a future methodology. And last section, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said that if you eat 2 charsanim and 1 zag, and together they form a kezayit, then only then is one liable, right? You have to have 2 charsanim and 1 zag. And we saw machloket about what is charsanim and what is zag. Rav Yosef, keman metargemina mepur sanin ve'ad isurin kerebi Yosef. You look at the Targum into Aramaic, you see that they translate the charsanim as pur sanin, and that means seeds. And they translate isurin that as zag as isurin, and that means skin. And so we see that, who does that follow? It follows the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, who said that charsanim means seeds, and zag, remember like the cowbell, right? Zug, as a cowbell is the outside, means the skin. Someone gave me a great insight today, that there's a good reason to make one plural and one singular, and that's because harsanim, seeds, a typical grape, I just looked it up, does have on average 2 seeds, sometimes 1, but sometimes up to 4. But most grapes, we're not familiar with this, that seeds that have grapes that have seeds, because we're so used to seedless. But right in the olden days, once upon a time, when grapes had seeds, they generally have multiple seeds. So charsanim means the seeds, zag, singular. Every grape has 1 skin. So they're talking about, don't eat a grape, not from the seeds to the skin, right? And everything in between, as that other Baraita taught. So it actually makes quite more sense than saying skins and 1 seed. Why would you have 1 seed and multiple skins? It makes a lot more sense to say multiple seeds and 1 skin, meaning the whole grape or any part of that one grape, whether the seeds or the skin. And so we see that even though the Bioseh is a minority opinion, he has the backing of the Targum. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.